No radar. No satellite had detected the silent descent of the alien vessel until it was too late. The ship hovered ominously in the upper atmosphere, massive, black, and devoid of any identifiable features. It was unlike anything humanity had ever seen, and its purpose became chillingly clear within hours of its arrival. From the vessel emerged the VA Crone, an army of lethal alien assassins bred for one purpose: to exterminate entire species. They moved with terrifying precision, their forms humanoid but twisted, their armor sleek and covered in strange glyphs that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. Each one carried weapons that defied human understanding, blades that cut through steel and beams of light that left nothing but ash in their wake. Their first strikes were swift and ruthless. Major cities across the globe, New York, London, Tokyo, were decimated in minutes. Communication networks fell silent. Entire military divisions were wiped out before they even had a chance to engage. Governments scrambled, deploying their most advanced forces in a desperate attempt to contain the threat. But the alien technology was far superior. Humanity's most advanced weapons seemed little more than toys in the face of the VA Crone's onslaught. The world's leaders convened emergency meetings in underground bunkers, their faces pale and drawn as they watched live feeds of their cities burning. The news channels, before they too went dark, broadcast footage of the assassins marching through the rubble, their dark forms illuminated by the fires of destruction. Civilians fled in all directions, but there was nowhere to hide. Panic gripped the world as people realized the unthinkable. Earth was defenseless. In a matter of days, the hope that humanity could somehow repel the invaders had crumbled. Fear took its place. It spread like wildfire, seeping into every corner of society. People whispered in hushed tones, asking questions no one had the answers to. What do they want? Why us? As the devastation mounted, a single, chilling truth began to settle in. The VA Crone didn't want anything. They didn't come to negotiate or conquer. They came to annihilate. Yet, even as the world teetered on the edge of total collapse, whispers began to surface of something, or someone, who could stop them. The rumors were vague, spoken in dark corners and transmitted in secret channels. Death had returned. No one knew who or what Death was. Some claimed he was a myth, an old war legend brought to life by desperate minds. Others spoke of a shadowy figure who had fought in humanity's wars long ago, a man who had once been human but had become something more. A few even suggested he wasn't human at all, that he was an ancient force, awakened by the bloodshed, destined to fight against the VA Crone. But most dismissed the rumors as superstition. How could one man or one creature stand against an army that had obliterated entire cities? What hope could exist in a world where even Earth's greatest militaries had fallen so swiftly? In the ruins of Washington, D.C., General Thomas Hale stood with what remained of his command. His steel-gray eyes scanned the horizon where the ashes of the Capitol still smoldered. Around him, soldiers tried to regroup, but their morale was shattered. Hale clenched his fists, his mind racing through every tactical option he had left. None of them were good. "We're running out of time," one of his aides muttered, watching a distant pillar of smoke rise from another skirmish. "I know," Hale replied, his voice low and grim. He had been a soldier his entire life, fighting in wars he thought would prepare him for anything. But nothing had prepared him for this. The VA Crone didn't fight like any enemy he had faced. They weren't trying to win a war. They were erasing humanity. He looked out at the devastation and felt a weight settle over him. More than the burden of command, more than the responsibility for the lives of the men and women under his care. This was something deeper. It was a realization that the world he had spent his life defending was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Unless the rumors were true, Hale had heard the whispers too. Death, they said, was coming. The idea seemed ludicrous, trusting in a shadowy figure from myth. But in his heart, Hale knew that desperate times called for desperate measures. He had seen the VA Crone up close, seen how effortlessly they dispatched his best soldiers. If there was even a shred of truth to the stories, Then they had no choice but to seek out this mysterious savior. A gust of wind blew through the remnants of the city, carrying with it the distant sounds of battle. Hale made his decision. "Send out a signal," he ordered. "We need to find this Death. Now." As his aide hurried to obey, Hale looked up at the sky, where the VA Crone ship still loomed. The fate of the world hung in the balance, and somewhere in the shadows, a figure was waiting to emerge. Hale could only hope that when death came, it would be enough. In a forgotten corner of the world, hidden away from the destruction that plagued Earth's cities, he waited. The man they called Death had been content to stay in the shadows, far from the chaos. His real name was long lost to time, buried beneath the myth that had grown around him. Once, he had been a soldier, like any other man, but years of war and countless battles had forged him into something more, something cold, something unstoppable. Death had seen this day coming, long before the VA Crone arrived. The moment humanity reached into the stars, it was inevitable they would attract the attention of something darker. He had hoped, foolishly, that the world might survive without him, that maybe, for once, humanity could stand on its own. But now, as he stood in the crumbling remains of an old outpost, listening to the distant hum of the VA Crone's invasion, he knew the time had come. Death didn't believe in destiny, but he knew fate had a cruel way of forcing one back into the fight. He strapped his blackened armor across his scarred body, the metal humming faintly with old energy. His weapons, once symbols of fear to his enemies, were still sharp, still deadly. A message had come, days ago, a signal sent by General Hale, the man who now led what remained of Earth's defense forces. Hale had asked for help, and though Death had turned away from humanity long ago, something inside him stirred. He had tried to leave the world to its fate, but when the enemy was so brutal, so merciless, how could he remain silent? His mission had always been simple: eliminate threats to humanity. It seemed that purpose had found him again. When Death emerged from the ruins and reached Hale's stronghold, the general was waiting. The camp was small, hidden deep in the forest where the alien forces had not yet ventured. The soldiers who spotted Death arriving fell silent, their eyes wide with disbelief. His presence felt almost otherworldly. His figure cloaked in black, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. General Hale approached him cautiously, unsure whether to believe the stories or dismiss them as wishful thinking. But seeing this figure before him, the legend of Death seemed all too real. "You actually came," Hale said, his voice filled with a mix of hope and desperation. Death didn't reply immediately. He studied the general with cold eyes, assessing the man who had summoned him. Hale had fought valiantly, but the lines of exhaustion etched on his face showed the toll the war had taken. Despite it all, Hale still carried himself with the bearing of a man determined to survive. "You were right to call," Death said finally, his voice low and deliberate. "But don't expect miracles. We're going to bleed before this is over." Hale nodded grimly. "We're already bleeding." Without another word, Death moved toward the map spread across a makeshift table. It outlined the latest locations of the VA Crone forces, their movements precise, their targets unrelenting. "They're methodical," Death murmured, tracing a finger over the path of destruction. "But they can be beaten." "How?" Hale asked, watching as Death studied the battlefield with unnerving calm. "I've fought enemies like them before," Death replied. "They're not invincible. They're trained killers, yes, but they're predictable. You don't stop an army like this head-on. You break them, one piece at a time, and you make them fear you." Hale stared at him. "And how do we do that?" "I'll show you," Death said, stepping back from the table. "I'll lead." Their first strike came at dawn, a swift counterattack on a squad of VA Crone assassins stationed on the outskirts of a ruined city. Death moved like a phantom through the debris, his every step silent, his presence like a dark shadow creeping across the battlefield. His hand gripped the hilt of his blade, an ancient weapon that seemed almost out of place in the modern world but was deadly in his hands. The VA Crone never saw him coming. In a blur of motion, Death struck. His blade severed the first alien's head before the others could react. They turned, their glowing eyes widening in surprise. These assassins, so used to being the hunters, suddenly found themselves outmatched. Death was faster, more precise. His strikes were surgical, each one a killing blow, each motion a calculated dance of violence. One of the VA crone tried to counter, raising a plasma rifle to fire, but Death anticipated the move, slipping beneath the shot and driving his blade through the alien's chest. As the creature fell, the remaining VA crone hesitated for the first time, and in that hesitation, they were doomed. The last alien tried to retreat, but Death's relentless pursuit ended it swiftly. He stood over the fallen assassin, his blade dripping with the dark blood of his enemies. For the first time in their conquest of Earth, the VA crone had tasted fear. As the battle ended, Hale's soldiers emerged from their positions, awestruck by what they had witnessed. The alien assassins, creatures who had brought humanity to its knees, lay dead at Death's feet. "You see now," Death said, turning to Hale. "They can be killed." Hale nodded, his eyes alight with something new, hope. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Death sheathed his blade and gazed toward the horizon, where the dark shape of the VA crone ship still hovered. "Yes," he said, his voice like a cold wind. "But now, they'll know fear." The ruins of what was once a great city stretched out before them, the skyline broken and twisted, shrouded in ash. It was here that the VA crone had chosen to make their final stand, their leader confident that this last human stronghold would fall like all the others. But the world had changed. In the weeks since Death's first strike, whispers of his name had spread like wildfire. Across the globe, scattered remnants of humanity had rallied, united under the shadow of the figure who had defied the alien executioners. Now, on the eve of the final battle, General Hale stood beside Death atop a ridge, overlooking the battlefield. Hale's soldiers, those who had survived the endless skirmishes, waited below, ready for the fight of their lives. They had trained hard under Death's relentless command, learning how to fight like him, swift, silent, and merciless. And though the odds were still grim, there was something different in the air. Hope. Death scanned the horizon, his dark cloak blending into the stormy sky. He could sense the tension in the soldiers behind him, the weight of what was about to happen. "They're coming," he said, his voice low but certain. Hale nodded, gripping the hilt of his sidearm. He had become a believer in a legend, not just because Death had shown him victory was possible, but because Death had given them something no leader could, the ability to strike fear into the hearts of the invaders. The VA crone, once invincible, had been shaken, and tonight they would face their reckoning. In the distance, the VA crone's dark ships descended like monstrous birds of prey, casting long shadows over the shattered cityscape. Their leader, Zareth, strode at the head of his army, a towering figure encased in black armor that shimmered with an unnatural energy. He was larger than the others, his form massive and intimidating, with eyes that burned like molten stars. Zareth was no mere assassin. He was the architect of humanity's downfall, and his presence radiated an aura of death. Death's hand tightened around the hilt of his blade as he watched Zareth approach. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the inevitable confrontation between two beings shaped by war. He turned to Hale, his face obscured beneath his hood. "Stay with your men. Hold the line. I'll take care of him." Hale wanted to argue, but he knew better. Death was the only one who could face Zareth directly. The general took a deep breath, then nodded. "Good luck," he said, though he wasn't sure Death needed it. The battle erupted without warning. The VA crone surged forward, their weapons blazing as they charged the human lines. Death moved first, launching himself into the fray with terrifying speed, his blade flashing in the dim light. He cut down the alien assassins with ruthless efficiency, carving a path through their ranks as if they were nothing more than shadows. Hale's soldiers, inspired by his example, fought with renewed ferocity. They no longer feared the VA crone. They had trained for this moment, and now, under Death's leadership, they met the enemy head-on. Explosions lit up the night, the roar of gunfire and alien screeches filling the air as humanity fought for its survival. In the heart of the battlefield, Death's eyes locked onto Zareth. The alien warlord stood motionless amidst the chaos, watching his soldiers fall with cold indifference. His massive form radiated power, his armor pulsing with a dark energy that seemed to warp the space around him. "You are the one they call Death," Zareth said, his voice a deep, guttural snarl. "I have waited for this." Death said nothing. His movements were deliberate as he approached, blade in hand. Zareth drew a massive sword from his back, the weapon humming with an unnatural energy. The two warriors stood face to face, the very air between them heavy with the weight of their impending clash. Zareth struck first, his sword cleaving through the space where Death had been only a heartbeat before. But Death was faster, ducking beneath the blow and slashing at Zareth's side. The warlord's armor sparked as the blade made contact, but it held firm. Zareth retaliated with a brutal backhand, sending Death sprawling across the ground. But Death rose again unfazed. The two clashed in a storm of steel and fury, each strike ringing out like a death knell. Zareth was powerful, his blows capable of leveling buildings, but Death was relentless, his precision unmatched. Each time Zareth tried to land a killing blow, Death would slip through his defenses, striking at his exposed weaknesses. The battle raged on, both warriors locked in a deadly dance. Around them, the human soldiers fought with everything they had, and slowly, miraculously, the tide began to turn. The VA Crone forces were breaking. Hale's elite soldiers pushed them back, cutting them down one by one, their fear of death stronger than their loyalty to Zareth. Finally, with a swift, decisive movement, Death struck the killing blow. His blade pierced through Zareth's chest, the dark energy that had once pulsed around him dissipating into the night. The VA Crone leader fell to his knees, his eyes wide with disbelief as the life drained from his body. Death stood over the fallen warlord, his breathing steady, his blade still dripping with blood. The battlefield had fallen silent. The VA Crone, seeing their leader dead, began to retreat, their once unshakable resolve shattered. The battle was over. As the remnants of the alien army fled, Hale approached Death, his face filled with awe and gratitude. "It's done," Hale said softly. Death sheathed his blade and turned to leave, his figure vanishing once again into the shadows. "It's only the beginning," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But now they know even death can bleed,